talk a little bit about in a traditional blues sense, where you're playing Chicago blues or even West Coast blues. The expectations that harp players, harmonica players, have of guitar players, and they have very strong expectations. And so they want to be able to play their parts, but they rely on the guitar to fill up a lot of those holes and to propel the song along. So if you have drums and bass, and then a harmonica and a guitar player, there's a lot of work the guitar player has to do to keep those songs moving along and to add color and energy, and to give them a bed to play on top of. So here's an example of something in A. So that's a lot of work. There's a lot of things happening there. So all these ideas really come from the old Delta blues guys. And if you're playing in a setting with a band, you may not have to hold down the bass like I was doing with my thumb. Certainly can. It just makes it a little bit harder. But all of those sort of slippery, slidey pieces of chords where you're playing a lot of two-note combinations, you're doing a lot of things to make it harmonically rich and propel the song along. So talk about some of the options, right? So one way to approach this to get started is to find 2 or 3 different themes that you could play over any of the chords, and then interchange those. So let's start with an example. One of the things you can do is a move like this. So that actually is sort of a primitive, roughed up version of something like this. A lot of horn lines you'll hear do things like that. Or that actually comes from the same reason we can play this. So it's a little bit rougher, but we're kind of going for that gritty sound. So you can do that over the 1, and what's kind of cool is when you go to the 4 chord, you can keep that same theme, but instead of a major third, right, you can drop to a minor third, because that minor third is over the 4 chord, the D, that's a 7. So you can go from I'm only using 2-note combinations, but we're implying more to the chord. A lot of times in this kind of playing, you really want to do 2 or 3-note chord parts. You don't want to do full 5-6-note chords. It's going to be too thick, and it's really hard to do anything interesting with those, right? Sometimes, but usually you want to avoid things like that. So there's an example. And then over the 4. Now over the 5, you could continue that theme and maybe that actually kind of works. But usually over the 5 chord, you want to break out of that and find something more interesting. So one of the things that I do a lot is I'll play over the 5, it's a E7. It's kind of like an E9, but I leave the 9 out because I'm going for something a little rougher. It also gives me the ability to do some things where I can move these fingers and create like a... So that's one idea. Another thing you can do, so you can do a little piece that's based on a 7. And then you can do that same sort of idea over the 4. So you notice I'm kind of bending. That's kind of a fundamental staple blues lick. Harp players actually play that same sort of idea themselves. So that's a good one if you want to kind of latch on to what they're playing. As you're bending into that major third from a minor third. Very bluesy sound. And then you can do that same lick over the 5. And now you get to the turnaround. Right, so you have lots and lots of options for the turnaround. Kind of everyone starts with the same idea. All right, so that's not a bad one, and there are times you do use that. There are ways to make that much more interesting and provide more motion. So even if you want to do that, you could do. It's kind of an old Delta trick, but the idea is that's providing motion. One of the things that, especially if someone is soloing, that you don't want to do is stop the groove and break up the momentum. So that just made everybody stop the momentum and you have to start over. So when you're soloing, that's kind of irritating, right? You want to keep pushing things to the next level. So probably avoid that whenever you can. And you could do something more like. See how that kept pushing things along? So all kinds of different turnarounds you could use. This is one that Jimmy Rogers, who played with Muddy Waters, used to use, which is a really cool one. And it's sort of the opposite way of what of kind of an old Delta turnaround. Just go the other way. So then if you kind of mix and match some of those ideas, right? That thing and this. Or you get a lot of different movements that you can do. So I'll show you a couple other things you can do kind of based off of that 5 chord. Right, so you could do just a regular E7. So let's take it from. So that's interesting. Where I went from the 5 and I went to the 4, but I did it that way. Which that note, that F sharp, it's in the 4 chord, but it's an interesting way once again to give the song some movement. So. And that little maneuver there, those little sliding chords, harp players love when guitar players do those. You're sliding from a 6th chord into a 9th chord. So let's look at that over the 1. And it's really those 3 notes. That really helps propel things. Oftentimes you use those to build as you go to another chord. So let's try this. So back. And then over the 5. All kinds of different things you can do over that turnaround. The idea is you want to make it interesting and push the song along. And I always play through those turnarounds unless there's a really good reason to do the old where it stops. Usually it's the white guys who do that. All right, so those are some cool things. And it takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable with that idea of playing pieces and parts of chords, transitioning those with lead lines, but that generally is an approach that harp players expect and appreciate. They want you to kind of hold the bottom down a little bit and fill the holes and be harmonically rich, not get in their way, but be busy. It takes years to get really good at it, and I don't think I'm quite there myself, but it's a challenge and it's a lot of fun.